Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are undertaking a very difficult, but I think absolutely necessary analysis. It's a case that's, well, haunted American justice for nearly 5 decades.
Yeah, it really has.
We're diving into the 1977 Oklahoma Girl Scout murders at Camp Scott in Mays County.
And this is a story defined by layers of conflict. I mean, you have this shockingly specific written warning that was just ignored, then a controversial arrest, a really unexpected acquittal.
Right.
And then decades later, forensic science comes along and seems to, well, retroactively confirm what law enforcement suspected all along.
So our mission here is to try and strip away some of the sensationalism, unpack the journey of this case. We really need to look closely at the physical evidence, which was sparse but critical. Understand the failure, really, of the 1979 criminal trial, and crucially get into how DNA technology evolved and how these dramatic shifts in legal jurisdiction, like the recent McGirt ruling, have completely redefined the pursuit of justice here.
It's vital, though, before we dive deep, that we take a moment to honor the victims, the heart of this tragedy.
Perhaps.
3 young girls, all from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Lori Lee Farmer, she was just 8 years old. Michelle Heather Guse, age 9. And Doris Denise Milner, age 10. They arrived at camp, ready for fun, for adventure.
Yeah.
And it just ended so tragically before it could even really begin.
And their story, right from the start, it raises this core paradox that kind of defines this whole deep dive. You had the local sheriff who basically pronounced the case solved after they arrested Jean Leroy Hart.
He was certain.
But officially today, the case is still listed as unsolved.
And that official status, that exists because of the courtroom outcome. Despite how strongly investigators felt, Hart was acquitted by a local jury back in '79. So in the eyes of the law, right, the case wasn't proven.
Okay.
Yet, fast forward, and modern science gives us overwhelming evidence that strongly links Hart to the crime. It creates this incredibly frustrating situation. Law enforcement feels they know who did it. But legally, the file remains open. The Camp Scott setting and a discarded warning.
Okay, let's set the scene. Picture this. Camp Scott. It's in the foothills of the Ozarks. Beautiful area. It's June 12th, 1977. This is the night before the main camp session was actually scheduled to start.
Right, the girls were just settling in.
Exactly. They're in tent number 7 in what they called the Kiowa unit.
And the physical geography here, the layout of the camp, it's absolutely critical to understand how this crime could even happen. Tent number 7, its position was key.
How so?
It was right at the very edge of the unit, significantly distant from where the adult camp counselors were staying.
Okay, distance. How much distance are we talking?
Right.
And why was that location, particularly dangerous?
We're talking about isolation, really. It offered anonymity to an attacker. That tent, it was the farthest one from the counselor's central tent. Later in the civil trial, they actually measured it 86 yards away.
86 yards. Wow.
And maybe even more importantly, it was partially hidden, obscured by the camp's shower and restroom building. So anyone approaching that tent, that specific unit, they had cover from the main area of the camp. They had time, they had distance, and these visual barriers. It was vulnerable.
And knowing that the camp had received this specific, really chilling warning less than 2 months before, it just makes the lack of security, especially in that isolated spot, feel almost, well, negligent in hindsight.
Oh, absolutely.
This precursor event, this warning, everyone listening needs to hear the details of this.
It's maybe the most devastating piece of the background story.
Oh.
Because it proves the camp leadership knew. They were forewarned about a specific threat, a threat of violence against kids.
When did this happen?
This was back in April 1977. During a counselor training session, one of the counselor's belongings got ransacked. A few small things were stolen, including a box of donuts.
Okay, seemingly minor, maybe. But what was found inside that empty donut box?
A handwritten note. And this is just chilling. It was composed entirely in capital letters. It said, "We are on a mission to kill 3 girls in tent 1.
Tent 1. Now, the girls who were killed were in tent 7, but the number of victims, 3 girls, and the stated mission, to kill. It's incredibly specific, hard to just brush off as a prank.
You'd think so.
So what did the camp director do? What was the reaction?
Well, the camp director,
Yeah.
perhaps feeling pressure, wanting to keep the camp running, avoid panic, treated it as a malicious prank, just dismissed it.
Dismissed it.
Entirely, and destroyed the note, threw it away.
They threw the note away.
Yeah. And the action, or really the lack of action, that became the absolute focus of the negligence claims the families brought later.
It's just astonishing. A threat that specific, given you're talking about children, vulnerable kids, that it could just be dismissed so easily. It almost suggests a kind of willful blindness to the potential danger right there in the woods.
It really does. And if you think about the bigger picture, it kind of speaks to human nature, doesn't it?
Mm.
How we often rationalize away things that seem unlikely or, truly horrific.
Yeah, you want to believe it's just kids messing around.
Exactly. People want to believe threats like that are just, I don't know, irresponsible teenagers, not premeditated attackers. But the fact remains, specific intelligence about violence at that exact location was received, it was acknowledged, and then it was discarded.
If they'd even just documented it, kept it.
Or increased patrols slightly, or maybe moved the most vulnerable tents, the ones on the edge, closer to the staff.
Yeah.
The outcome might have been different. That ignored note, it basically became a tragic blueprint for what happened just 2 months later. The discovery and crime scene facts, June 13th, 1977.
So the camp settles down that Sunday night, June 12th. Reports say the girls were huddling together, maybe telling stories, around 7 p.m. in tent number 7.
It's just normal camp night, seemingly.
Until the early hours of Monday morning, June 13th. The silence was broken then.
Yeah, the alarm wasn't actually raised until about 6 a.m. A camp counselor was walking towards the showers and saw what looked like a body.
Oh, my God.
They quickly realized all 3 girls from tent 7 were missing.
And where they were found, the location of the discovery, that tells us something, doesn't it? About the attacker's plan, maybe? Or perhaps where the girls were headed.
It does. The bodies were found about 150 yards. That's roughly 140 meters away from their tent. Yeah. Off the trail that led to the shower facility.
Okay, so not in the tent itself.
No. Which strongly suggests one of 2 things. Either they were abducted from the tent and moved, or maybe they were intercepted as they were trying to make their way to the restroom or showers, in the dark or very early morning.
And the positioning of the bodies, it was described as highly disturbing.
The scene was just brutal. 2 of the bodies were found actually inside a sleeping bag, sort of crumpled towards the bottom, which suggests they might have been placed there or forced into it after the attack.
And the third?
The third body was visible just outside the sleeping bag. Later examination, the autopsies, revealed the cause of death was a horrific combination of bludgeoning, strangulation, and the victims had also been sexually assaulted.
Back in 1977, forensic science was, well, it was nowhere near what we have today. So investigators had to rely heavily on what they could see, on physical clues that could be transferred.
Exactly. Old school detective work.
What were those specific pieces of evidence they found at the scene?
Well, the most immediate and probably the most tantalizing piece of evidence was a large red metal flashlight. It was clearly left behind by the perpetrator, found just resting right on top of the victims' bodies.
Wow, so the attacker dropped their light source.
Yeah, which could point to a hasty exit, maybe panic, or just carelessness.
But the crucial clue on that flashlight, the fingerprint, that wasn't the smoking gun they hoped for, was it?
No, not at all. It was a source of huge frustration for investigators. They did lift a smudged fingerprint from the lens of that flashlight.
Okay.
And they tried repeatedly to enhance it, to match it. But it was just too degraded, too partial, too smudged for a positive, irrefutable ID. The kind you need for a criminal prosecution.
Especially back then.
Fingerprint tech in the 70s needed high clarity, a good number of matching points, minutia. This print just didn't have it. It was a failure of circumstance and the technology available at the time.
And inside the tent, where the attack or the abduction likely started, was there anything there?
Yes. There was a clue about the attacker's size, potentially. They found a shoe footprint, size 9.5, pressed into blood on the tent floor.
Size 9.5. Okay, that's useful.
Highly useful. It immediately eliminates anyone with really small feet or really large feet, and it gave the police a key measurement to compare against potential suspects as they started investigating.
And that detail, the 9.5 footprint, that became incredibly important when they started focusing on Hart, didn't it? I mean, if his shoe size didn't match?
Exactly. The defense would have had a field day.
Yeah.
It needed the physical profile to line up. It had to fit.
Right.
And finally, there was the timeline aspect, provided by an external witness.
Ah, yes, the landowner. He reported hearing, what was it, quite a bit of unusual traffic.
Yeah, quite a bit. A vehicle traffic on a remote road near the camp. And he pinpointed the time, between 2:30 a.m. and 3 a.m. on that Monday morning, June 13th.
That's a tight window.
Very significant time window. It falls right in the middle of the night, suggesting the traffic was likely related to the crime itself. Either the attacker arriving, maybe surveying the scene, or most probably making a quick getaway.
So it narrowed down the timing.
Right. While it wasn't hard evidence of the crime, it helped narrow the focus for when the offense likely happened, from a broad nighttime window down to this tight 30-minute span.
Okay, so let's piece together the profile they had then. Someone wearing a size 9.5 shoe, potentially left a smudged print on a flashlight, drove near the site between 2:30 and 3 a.m., and was violent enough to commit these horrific acts: bludgeoning, strangulation, rape. That combination of clues, even if it's all circumstantial, it really points towards a very specific type of predator, doesn't it?
It points toward someone local, someone violent, someone who either planned this attack meticulously or at least knew the area incredibly well, well enough to operate in the pitch dark of the early morning.
And that's exactly where the investigation turned its attention almost right away. So after the discovery, the horrifying discovery, and the immediate evacuation, Camp Scott was shut down permanently. You can only imagine the emotional toll on the community. The pressure to find who did this must have been immense.
Overwhelming. Absolutely overwhelming. And within a fairly short time, the investigation really zoomed in on one person, Jean Leroy Hart.
Why him specifically?
Well, Hart was the person who, at least on paper, seemed to fit the profile perfectly. The profile of the kind of violent offender police feared was operating out there in that remote location.
Okay.
For one thing, he was a member of the Cherokee Nation, and he had actually been raised in the immediate vicinity of the camp, like about a mile away from Camp Scott itself. He knew the area.
Local knowledge. And his background, his criminal history wasn't just minor stuff, right?
Well, far from it. His history was horrific. Hart wasn't just a serious felon. He was actually a jail escapee. He'd been on the run since 1973, 4 years before the murders.
Escape from where?
From prison, where he'd been convicted of kidnapping and raping 2 pregnant women. That was alongside 4 counts of first-degree burglary.
My God.
Yeah. So, when the murders happened, he was technically serving this massive 308-year sentence. He had 305 years left to serve. He was a known, violent fugitive, hiding out right there in the local woods.
Okay, given that history, that proximity,
Yeah.
you can understand why law enforcement felt, as you said, 1,000% certain it was him.
Their certainty was absolute. They eventually caught him within about a year of the murders, found him hiding out at the home of a Cherokee medicine man in the area,
Right.
and the state immediately moved forward with the murder charges.
Okay, let's talk about the trial itself. March 1979, with that level of public outrage, the pressure on the jury must have been just enormous. What was the atmosphere like?
Toxic. Toxic with certainty, really. The local sheriff, in a really unusual move, actually went public saying he was 1,000% certain of Hart's guilt.
Wow.
That puts enormous external pressure on the whole legal process, you know. Hart was represented by Garvin A. Isaacs, who was a pretty well-known Oklahoma defense attorney, and Isaacs knew he had this massive uphill battle against public opinion and a jury that was obviously going to be deeply sympathetic to the victims.
So, if the police were so certain and the suspect's background was so damning, how on earth did Isaacs manage to get an acquittal? A unanimous acquittal, no less.
Yeah, this is the absolute crux of the legal story here. Isaacs didn't have to prove Hart was innocent. He only had to establish reasonable doubt.
The standard in criminal court.
Exactly. And he launched this really vigorous defense that focused entirely on the circumstantial nature of the evidence and, importantly, the forensic limitations of 1977 technology.
What specifically did he manage to poke holes in?
Okay, first, that smudged fingerprint on the flashlight. Isaacs hammered on the fact that police could not positively identify it as belonging to Hart, or anyone else for that matter.
Right, it was unidentified.
It was an unidentified print on a compelling piece of evidence, sure, but it wasn't definitively linked to his client.
What about the physical measurements, the shoe size?
Isaacs argued, quite effectively, that lots of men wear size 9.5 shoes. Okay, maybe Hart wore that size. But the state couldn't definitively place his specific shoe at the scene. There was no unique identifier. Furthermore, the defense pointed out what they argued were glaring omissions and errors in the original 1977 investigation. Things like potentially poor crime scene preservation.
Yeah.
And the fact that other potential suspects or leads might have been ignored because the police focused so quickly and so completely on Hart, the known fugitive who was right there.
So basically the defense strategy was, yes, he looks bad, he was in the area, he has a terrible history, but you haven't proven it was him. You don't have the hard, irrefutable physical proof needed for a conviction.
Precisely. They capitalized on the technological limits of the time and the state's heavy reliance on motive and circumstantial evidence. And the result, despite the sheriff's certainty, despite Hart's violent past, A local jury unanimously acquitted Jean Leroy Hart of the murder charges.
He walked free from the Camp Scott case.
From that case, yes.
That acquittal must have been just a gut punch to the prosecution, the families, everyone who was convinced of his guilt. But, as you said, he wasn't actually a free man, was he?
No, not at all. Because of his prior convictions, those kidnapping and rape charges, he was immediately returned to the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. He still had that 300-plus-year sentence to serve.
So the murder case was legally closed, acquitted, but the man himself remained behind bars.
Correct.
And his time back in prison after the acquittal was relatively short.
It was, yeah, just about 2 years after the murders, actually. On June 4th, 1979, Jean Leroy Hart collapsed and died right there in the prison exercise yard. He was only 35 years old.
What happened?
He'd apparently been lifting weights and jogging for about an hour. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack.
So Hart's death provided this strange, final, and deeply unsatisfying end to the criminal investigation phase.
Completely unsatisfying. The prime suspect was gone. The case was officially unsolved in the eyes of the court, but for many people in Mays County, the narrative was already fixed. They believed they knew who did it.
And this set the stage for the next battleground, civil court, and the slow, steady advance of forensic science. Okay, so the criminal justice system avenue was closed, the prime suspect was deceased, the families seeking some form of accountability really only had one option left: civil litigation, trying to hold someone responsible for the negligence they believed led to their daughter's death.
And that's a really vital distinction for you listening. Criminal court requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a very high bar. Civil court requires proof by a preponderance of the evidence. Basically, is it more likely than not? It's a much lower standard.
Right.
So in 1985, two of the families sued the Magic Empire Council of the Girl Scouts and their insurer. They were seeking US $5 million, which, if you adjust for inflation, is roughly $14.6 million today.
And what were the main arguments in that civil trial? It was all about negligence, right? Failure to protect the girls.
Correct. The core argument was a failure of what's called duty of care. The family's lawyers really hammered on two major points. First, that specific discarded warning note from April.
The kill 3 girls note.
Exactly. They argued this was concrete proof the camp had specific knowledge of a threat and essentially did nothing significant about it. And second, they focused hard on the physical layout of the camp. The fact that tent number 7 was 86 yards away from the counselor's tent.
The isolation factor again.
Right. They argued that placing young children in such an isolated tent, especially after receiving that specific threat, constituted negligence. It was unreasonable risk.
So even with the lower standard of proof in civil court, did the family succeed? Did they prove negligence?
Agonizingly, no. The civil jury, by a 9-3 vote, actually decided in favor of the Magic Empire Council.
Wow. So the camp wasn't found negligent?
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
The majority of the jurors believed either that the camp organization had acted reasonably under the circumstances, or at least that the families hadn't proven, by that preponderance of the evidence standard, that the camp's actions or inaction directly caused the murders. It was another devastating blow.
That's just an immense legal hurdle for these families. Acquittal in criminal court, failure in civil court. But as you pointed out earlier, the scientific clock was ticking, technology was catching up, slowly but surely.
And this is where the story takes another dramatic turn. Because the families and some investigators, they never stopped trying. They held on to the limited biological evidence they had managed to retain from the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And the first real attempt to apply new science came in 1989. This was right at the dawn of the DNA era in forensics.
Okay, let's unpack that 1989 testing, because the results, as reported, sound kind of complex. 3 of the 5 probes matched Hart's DNA profile. What does that actually mean in practical terms, especially back then?
Okay, so in 1989, the technology they were using was called RFLP analysis, restriction fragment length polymorphism. It's kind of clunky compared to today. Think of DNA like a really, really long rope. RFLP uses specific chemical scissors enzymes to cut that rope into fragments of different lengths.
Okay.
Then they use these things called probes, which are like little radioactive or fluorescent markers, to find 5 specific sections within those fragments. When they tested the samples from the crime scene against Hart's known DNA sample, 3 out of those 5 specific markers matched his pattern.
So a partial match, but not a full match across all 5 points they were looking at.
Exactly. RFLP required quite a lot of high-quality, non-degraded DNA sample material, which is a huge challenge here. They barely had enough. So getting a match on 3 out of 5 probes was actually considered statistically significant for the time.
How significant?
Well, Investigators calculated that this particular three-probe profile would apply to about 1 in 7,700 Native American men.
Okay, so much better than just random chance, but not definitive.
Right. It was strong, circumstantial scientific evidence. It definitely reconfirmed Hart as the prime suspect in the eyes of science, but it was nowhere near the kind of definitive statistical certainty, 1 in billions or trillions that we expect today for a conviction based on DNA alone.
So it kept the embers glowing on the suspicion, but it didn't definitively solve the case in a way that could change the legal outcome.
Precisely. It wasn't enough. Then, fast forward nearly 2 decades to 2008.
Okay, what happened then? Technology must have advanced again.
Oh, drastically. By 2008, the standard had shifted mostly to STR, short tandem repeat analysis. This method is much more sensitive, requires far less DNA material. So authorities tried again. They attempted new testing on some stains found on a pillowcase that was recovered from Tent 7.
Did it work this time?
Unfortunately, no. This attempt basically hit the wall of evidence degradation. The samples were just too old, too broken down.
So even with the better, more sensitive technology?
The samples were declared too deteriorated to obtain a DNA profile. It's just a heartbreaking illustration of this race against time. Decades of waiting meant the evidence itself was literally vanishing, molecule by molecule.
Just decaying over time.
Exactly. The delicate nature of biological evidence, combined probably with less than ideal initial preservation techniques back in '77, they were always fighting an uphill battle. But the families, they refused to accept this as the final word. In 2017, they managed to raise US $30,000.
Wow.
Specifically earmarked for testing the remaining samples, whatever was left, using the absolute latest forensic advances available, pushing the envelope of the science.
And this is where the forensic narrative finally achieves, well, maybe not legal closure, but some kind of scientific closure.
Yes. This is the breakthrough moment, forensically speaking. The testing done around 2017, with results becoming clear by 2019 and made public in 2022. It used highly advanced methods, maybe targeting mitochondrial DNA, which is more robust, or using incredibly sensitive STR analysis techniques, the kind that can sometimes read minute amounts of DNA, what people sometimes call touch DNA.
Okay.
The results were apparently known internally by law enforcement from about 2019, but they didn't go public with the specifics until 2022, reportedly at the request of the victims' families. And the conclusion was stated very clearly this time. The DNA evidence strongly suggests Jean Leroy Hart's involvement.
That phrasing shift is significant, from a 1 in 7,700 probability back in '89 to strongly suggests involvement in 2022. That feels profound. It's like modern science finally validating the gut feeling of those 1977 investigators.
It is absolute vindication for those original investigators, yes. Sheriff Mike Reed, the current sheriff of Mays County, made this very public in 2022. He stated, quite plainly, he was convinced where I'm sitting of Hart's guilt and involvement in this case. He affirmed that the quality of the modern DNA match confirms their original focus on Hart was correct all along. It provides a level of certainty for the families about who the perpetrator was, even though the man himself is long dead and the legal acquittal still sexed.
The tragic loss of Lori, Michelle, and Doris, it didn't just end there. It actually sparked this incredible wave of activism that fundamentally changed the landscape for victims' rights in Oklahoma. The parents especially channeled their grief into trying to make lasting legislative change.
The legacy of advocacy that came out of this is really powerful. Richard Guse, Michelle's father, became this absolutely tireless advocate. He was instrumental, truly instrumental, in helping the state legislature pass the Oklahoma Victims' Bill of Rights.
Okay, what did that do?
It's crucial legislation. It ensures that victims of violent crime have specific enumerated rights within the legal process, rights to be informed, rights to be heard, things that simply didn't exist in a structured way for families like his back in 1977.
So giving victims a voice in the system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he didn't stop there. He also played a key role in founding the Oklahoma Crime Victims Compensation Board.
What's that?
It provides financial assistance. It helps victims and their families cope with some of the expenses related to the crime, medical bills, counseling, lost wages, things like that. These are profound, systemic changes built directly out of the ashes of this terrible tragedy.
And Cherie Farmer, Lori's mother, she also turned her grief towards helping others, didn't she? Focusing on communal support.
She did. She founded the Oklahoma chapter of Parents of Murdered Children. It's a vital support group that has offered comfort, solace, and practical resources to countless other families navigating these unimaginable losses. It just demonstrates how personal tragedy can sometimes be transformed into robust, long-term policy and essential social support networks.
Beyond the legislative and support group legacy, the case itself has remained really prominent in our cultural memory. It's been featured in numerous books, documentaries. I remember the 1993 documentary Someone Cry for the Children.
That was influential. And of course, more recently, the 2022 ABC News documentary Keeper of the Ashes got significant attention. Partly because of its host, the actress and singer Kristen Chenoweth, who share this intensely personal connection to the events.
Right, that connection really brought the horror home for a whole new generation, I think. Chenoweth revealed she was an 8-year-old Girl Scout herself back then.
Yeah.
And had actually planned to go on that exact camping trip to Camp Scott, but she missed it because she got sick.
It's chilling. That simple twist of fate, getting sick, that separated her from the victims,
Yeah.
it just highlights the terrifying randomness of the tragedy.
It really adds an emotional weight that few court cases possess. But maybe the most surprising and legally dynamic development regarding this 1977 case actually happened only very recently. And it's rooted in a 2021 Supreme Court decision, McGirt v. Oklahoma.
Yes, this is huge.
Okay, we need to give this ruling the detailed attention it deserves. Can you explain the foundational implication of McGirt for our listener and how it applies specifically to Mays County, where Camp Scott was?
Okay, so historically, for decades, Oklahoma state courts handled nearly all crimes committed within the state's borders, regardless of who was involved or exactly where it happened within the state. However, the McGirt ruling, a landmark decision, affirmed something critical: that a huge portion of eastern Oklahoma, including Mays County, where Camp Scott is located, had actually never been officially disestablished by Congress as Native American reservation land. Specifically, in this area, the Cherokee Nation Reservation.
So the Supreme Court basically said this land is still legally reservation land.
In essence, yes. And the legal ramification of confirming that status is massive. It fundamentally affirms tribal sovereignty over criminal jurisdiction in many cases.
Okay, what does that mean practically for crimes?
It means that for many crimes committed within that reservation territory, if the perpetrator or the victim is a member of a federally recognized tribe, like the Cherokee Nation, the state of Oklahoma often loses jurisdiction. Jurisdiction instead shifts to either the relevant tribal court system or to the federal government.
Wow, okay. And since Jean Leroy Hart was a member of the Cherokee Nation,
Right.
and the crime took place on what the Supreme Court now recognizes as Cherokee Nation reservation land.
That changes the entire legal status of this 1977 case, even though it happened over 40 years ago and the main suspect is deceased. Because the state of Oklahoma still officially classifies the murders as unsolved, remember? Because of the 1979 acquittal, the case now falls under the legal lens, the jurisdiction, of the Cherokee Nation.
That is just an extraordinary jurisdictional twist. A case that the state system considered cold, legally closed in terms of prosecution due to acquittal, has effectively been handed a new investigative life by a Supreme Court ruling focused on tribal sovereignty.
Exactly. And it's not just theoretical. The Cherokee Nation is now actively investigating the 1977 killings under their own sovereign authority. They're reviewing all the evidence, including that modern DNA analysis that strongly points to Hart's involvement.
So the investigation isn't truly over.
Not at all. It's merely shifted forums, shifted jurisdiction, and the Cherokee Nation might be able to uncover information or perspectives that were perhaps overlooked by the original state investigation back in '77, particularly things related to, say, local indigenous knowledge or movements of people within the nation's territory at that time.
It also really puts the whole concept of closure into question, doesn't it? If the state says it's unsolved, but the science points strongly one way, and now a new sovereign legal entity is actively investigating, what does justice even mean in this context?
It means justice is perhaps more fluid, more dependent on context than we sometimes think. The McGirt ruling ensures that the search for truth in this case continues, but now through a process that respects tribal authority and sovereignty. It provides a pathway for continued investigation that was simply unimaginable back when this horrific crime occurred. It's really a testament to the enduring legal and societal impact of this tragedy, stretching across decades.
Okay, let's try and unpack this and maybe summarize the core nuggets we've pulled out from this really chilling, complex deep dive.
Yeah, it's covered, nearly 5 decades of legal battles, scientific advancements, and heartache. I think first we saw how the 1977 tragedy was disturbingly foreshadowed by that ignored, very specific written threat. And that failure arguably cost the camp their defense in the later civil suit.
Right. And second, the initial physical evidence from 77, that smudged flashlight print, the size 9.5 footprint, it was compelling, certainly pointed fingers, but ultimately it wasn't enough to overcome the standard of reasonable doubt in the 1979 criminal trial.
Mm-hmm. Third, despite that unanimous acquittal, which was secured by a really strong defense strategy focusing on the circumstantial nature of the evidence back then, the suspect, Jean Leroy Hart, remains the central figure. Why? Because of the subsequent scientific breakthroughs. We learned the 1989 RFLP DNA test gave a strong probability. Remember, 3 out of 5 probes matched, about 1 in 7,700. But it was the modern advanced testing confirmed publicly in 2022 that provided that definitive scientific link, strongly suggesting his involvement.
Yeah, the science finally caught up, in a sense. And finally, we discussed that powerful legacy of victim advocacy, how the parents' work fundamentally reshaped state law in Oklahoma regarding victims' rights and support. And then this current, really dynamic legal context brought about by the McGirt ruling.
Which affirms tribal jurisdiction, meaning this case, still officially unsolved by the state, is now under active investigation by the Cherokee Nation.
It's just a perfect, albeit painful, example of how advancements in science, coupled with these massive shifts in legal boundaries, can retroactively change how we understand the history of the case, how we think about justice. Even when that initial legal finality, the acquittal, still stands on the books, the knowledge we have today is fundamentally different from the knowledge that 1979 jury had.
Absolutely. Which brings us, I think, to the provocative thought for you, the listener, to take away from this. This case spans, 2 centuries now, multiple jurisdictions. We have overwhelming scientific evidence pointing to one person who is deceased. Yet the case remains officially open, now under a new governing body, the Cherokee Nation. So given that the state system still calls it unsolved, and the Cherokee Nation now holds jurisdiction, what further information could they potentially uncover? Information perhaps missed by the original Mays County investigators back in '77. And maybe more fundamentally, does this continuing pursuit of information, this continuing investigation by the Cherokee Nation, regardless of whether anyone can ever be prosecuted again, does that pursuit itself constitute the only true measure of closure or justice possible in a case this complex, this tragic, this long-lasting?
That's a difficult question, a really difficult question for a deeply difficult history. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.